Good morning, children. Today in Social Science and Civics in Class 9, we continue working of institutions, and now we take up today Judiciary. Now, Judiciary is independent of both legislature and executive. In other words, that means that they are independently working and functioning without anybody's control over it. Now, what is judiciary? Judiciary, it refers to an institution which is empowered to administer justice and provide a mechanism for resolution of legal disputes. That is, that means if there is any form of injustice towards anyone or anybody's rights are violated, the judiciary is there to settle the matter. So it is an institution that is helping in solving the legal disputes. So Indian judiciary consists of Supreme Court, which is the highest or the apex court in the country for the entire nation. Then we have the high courts and subordinate courts in the states, district courts and courts at local levels, and lok adalats. So the judiciary works on this basis that at the topmost we have the Supreme Court, which is working for the entire nation. Then we have high courts and subordinate courts in the states also. Then district courts and courts at local levels. So India has an integrated or unified judiciary, which means that the Supreme Court controls the judicial administration in the country. That means the Supreme Court is the apex court. It is the highest court in the country and nobody can go against it. And whatever orders it gives, it has to be followed by everyone. So its decisions are binding on all other courts of the country. So that is the Supreme Court, that is the apex court, the most important and the highest court in the country, which controls the judicial administration in the country. And in whatever manner or in the whatever decisions that are taken by the Supreme Court are binding on all other courts of the country and on everyone. Now we'll come to the independence of judiciary. When we say independence, that means that they are working independently. They are not working under the legislature or the executive. They are completely different and independent, so they are able to take matters what they feel is the Supreme Court feels is right. Judiciary is not under the control of the legislature or the executive. So that is speaking of the independence of the judicial system. The judges do not act on the direction of the government or act according to the wishes of the political party in power. That means that the ruling party, which has some power, and they are implementing all policies and decisions, but the judges do not act according to their directions. That is why we say that the judiciary is independent and they are not under the control of anybody, neither the legislature nor the executive. Now, what are the powers of the Supreme Court? There are many powers. The Supreme Court controls the judicial administration in the country. Like I said earlier, that it is the apex court, the highest court in the country. It can settle and settle the disputes. Now, there are many kinds of disputes that may arise in the country. One form of dispute may be between citizens of the country. So that can be settled by the Supreme Court. Then another may be between citizens and government. That can also be there can be some issue between citizens and the government. So that can be settled by the Supreme Court. Then there can be a dispute between two or more state governments. In such cases also the Supreme Court has the power to settle it. And then there can also be a situation where there's a dispute between governments at the union and the state level. So there can be different kinds of disputes, but all these are settled by the Supreme Court. As an example, if we see that there was a case that was filed in the Supreme Court against the government of India, decision of 27% of reservation for the socially backward classes. And this case was known as the Indira Sawhney and other versus Union of India case. So the matter was decided by the Supreme Court and the government order was valid. So any form of dispute that takes place between citizens of the country or between citizens and government, or they can be between two state governments also, or between governments at the union and state level. So all these disputes will be settled by the Supreme Court. Then what are the other powers of the Supreme Court? Here we talked about the settlement of disputes. Now we have, it is the highest court of appeal in criminal and civil cases against decisions of the High Court, which means that the highest court, that means that it is above the High Court. We have at various levels. Supreme Court is the highest. Then below that we have the High Court and subordinate courts in the states. Then we have district courts and courts at local level also. So this is the highest court of appeal in case of a criminal or a civil case. And it can decide, an appeal can be made against decisions of the High Court. That means if the High Court has given a judgment, an appeal can be made in the Supreme Court against the High Court's decision. Then another one is that the Supreme Court gives legal advice to the President of India if there is a situation or under some circumstances. The Supreme Court gives legal advice to the President of India on any legal or constitutional matter referred to it. That means if it is asked to provide the advice, it will give. So that is another important power that it has, that is, it gives advice to the President of India over some legal matter which is related to the Constitution and it has been referred to. Then the Supreme Court has the power to interpret the Constitution of the country. The Constitution, which is so much in detail, and it is the Supreme Court which can interpret that if and when it is required. Then we also see that the powers and independence of judiciary allows it to act as a guardian of fundamental rights. That means it protects the fundamental rights. Now we have 6 fundamental rights. These 6 fundamental rights, which are, one is right to equality, second is right to freedom, third is right against exploitation, fourth is right to freedom of religion, fifth is cultural and educational rights, and the sixth is right to constitutional remedies. Now this is important for the simple reason that this makes all other rights effective. If any fundamental right or rights have been violated of any citizen, the citizen can approach the High Court or the Supreme Court. So it is important that it is a guardian, that means it is protecting the fundamental rights given to the citizens of the country, which is also there in the Constitution. So we see that there are 3 jurisdiction powers of the Supreme Court. Jurisdiction means when the official power to make legal decisions. First is advisory jurisdiction. That is, what it means is that the Supreme Court can advise the President on any question of law or any matter of public importance. So that is known as the advisory jurisdiction. Why? Because it can, if required, on any question of law or any matter of public importance, the advisory jurisdiction is what it is known as. Then second, we have appellate jurisdiction. That means appeals. Appellate means to make an appeal. The Supreme Court has the power to hear and decide appeals against judgment of lower courts. Like supposing a case has been settled in the High Court and a person or persons are not satisfied with the judgment of the lower court, then an appeal can be made in the Supreme Court. So that is why it is called as the appellate jurisdiction. And third is original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction, that means it is related to the settlement of disputes. And what kind of disputes that it may settle? It extends to all cases between Government of India and the States of India. Maybe a situation where there is a dispute between government and the States of India, or there can be a situation between Government of India and states on one side and one or more states on another side. So that there may be a dispute over some matter. So that also is what the Supreme Court will decide. So all these cases between different states. So all this is, we have these 3, you can say, the 3 jurisdiction powers of Supreme Court, which is namely known as advisory jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction and original jurisdiction. Thank you.